Little girl exposed a rich CEO's forged documents. His reaction shocked everyone. Alexander entered his office in the morning. On his chair, a little girl was sitting with a file in her hands. She looked straight at him and said, "Sir, the documents you signed yesterday for the $100 million deal are forged. They are fake, and I can prove it." Alexander froze. He had built an empire through discipline and caution, yet here was a child, calmly announcing fraud in his own office. His assistant moved quickly, trying to remove her, but Alexander lifted his hand, stopping him. He stepped closer, his sharp eyes studying her. "Repeat what you just said," he demanded. The girl stood, gripping the file tightly. "These papers are not real. The man who gave them to you is a fraud. Look at this file, and you will see the truth." Alexander took the file from her hands. For a moment, the weight of it seemed heavier than paper. He opened it, scanning line after line. His experienced eyes picked out flaws. The ink too fresh, the seals mismatched, the numbers strangely altered. His heartbeat slowed, heavy with realization. She was not lying. He shut the file and fixed his gaze on her. "What is your name?" "Emily," she said. Her voice was small, but steady. "Emily," Alexander repeated, as if testing the sound. "How do you know all this?" Emily's face hardened with courage far beyond her age. "My father worked for him. When he discovered the fraud, they forced him out. He tried to warn people, but no one listened. Last night I found the real papers hidden at home. I came because I knew you had to hear the truth." The assistant scoffed. "Sir, this is nonsense. She's just a child." But Alexander ignored him. He could feel the truth pressing against his chest. If what Emily said was right, then someone had nearly tricked him into the biggest loss of his career. He looked around the room. His staff were silent, their eyes darting nervously. Not one of them had seen what this little girl had seen. He leaned closer to her. "Emily, do you understand what you are saying? If this is true, you have just uncovered a $100 million fraud." Emily nodded. Her small hands trembled slightly, but her eyes did not waver. "Yes, sir. And if you don't stop it now, it will destroy more than just money." Her words struck him like a blade. Alexander felt anger rising inside him, not at her, but at himself. He prided on control, on precision, yet he had been seconds away from disaster. He looked again at the file in his hand, then at Emily. "You did the right thing coming here," he said finally. His voice was calm but heavy. He turned sharply to his assistant. "Cancel every detail of yesterday's deal. Shut it down. No one leaves this office until I review every line of the contract again." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, do it." Alexander's tone cut the air like a whip. The office erupted into action. Phones rang, orders flew, footsteps rushed across the hall. But amid the chaos, Alexander kept his eyes on Emily. There was something unshakable in her presence, something that reminded him of a truth long buried. Honesty does not need age, only courage. He guided her gently into his private office. Closing the door behind them, he set the file on his desk and faced her. "Emily, you've done something most adults would not dare. But tell me, why take this risk? Why walk into my office when you could have stayed silent?" Emily's eyes filled with quiet pain. "Because I know what it feels like to watch lies ruin everything. My father lost his job. We lost our home. People laughed at him for telling the truth. I couldn't let the same lie destroy you too. Someone had to speak." Alexander sat back, studying her. For years he had believed power was built on wealth, strategy, and strength. But this child had shown him that sometimes power comes from standing alone with the truth. He folded his hands together, his voice softer now. "Where is your father?" "At home," Emily whispered. "Looking for work. No one will hire him because of that man. They call him a troublemaker." Alexander's jaw tightened. He hated betrayal, and now betrayal had walked straight into his own empire. He rose from his chair, pacing the room. He could see it clearly now. His rival's smiling face, his charming handshake, his false promises. Rage simmered under his control. He turned back to Emily. "You've done more than warn me," he said firmly. "You may have saved this company. And I promise you this. No man who cheats and ruins families will walk free. Not while I am here." Emily blinked, surprised by the steel in his words. He leaned forward. "From now on, you are not alone. I will see to it that your father's truth is heard." and those behind this fraud will answer for it. Emily nodded slowly. For the first time in months, she felt hope flicker in her chest. Outside, the office buzzed with confusion and whispers. Employees exchanged glances, astonished by the turn of events. A billionaire CEO nearly trapped, saved not by his advisors, but by a child who had the courage to speak. Inside, Alexander stood by the window, holding the forged file in his hand. His empire had been shaken, but not by weakness, by a warning. And as he looked back at Emily, he knew one thing with certainty. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a war he had no choice but to fight. Alexander stood by the window, the forged file still in his hand, his jaw tight. The city outside moved with its usual pace, cars rushing, people walking, but inside his office, time felt frozen. He turned back to Emily, the little girl who had shaken his entire morning. Emily, everything you told me will change how I deal with people from today. But this can't end here. I need every detail you know. Tell me everything from the beginning. Emily sat down carefully, her small frame swallowed by the large leather chair. She placed her hands on her lap and began. My father, Daniel Parker, worked for Mr. Hayes. At first, everything seemed normal. But last year, he discovered Hayes was forging documents to steal money from his partners. My father confronted him. Instead of stopping, Hayes laughed. He said nobody would believe a man like my father against someone so powerful. When my father refused to sign a false report, they fired him. He tried to speak out, but every door was closed. Hayes made sure of it. Alexander listened silently, his sharp mind connecting the dots. Hayes had been his business ally for months. They had shaken hands, shared meals, and signed deals together. Alexander prided himself on reading people, yet somehow Hayes had played him. He tightened his grip on the file, his anger rising. Emily continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Last night, I found these papers hidden in an old box at home. My father didn't know I saw them. But when I read them, I recognized Hayes's name and your company's name. I realized you were in danger. So I came here. Alexander leaned forward. Does your father know you're here? Emily shook her head. No. He thinks no one will listen. He gave up trying. But I couldn't. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Alexander finally stood. Emily, you are braver than you realize. What you've done today is not just about saving me. It's about saving hundreds of people whose lives could have been destroyed by this fraud. But you must understand, Hayes will not stop easily. He will fight back. Emily's eyes flickered with fear, but she held her ground. I'm not afraid. He already hurt my family. I don't want him to hurt others. Alexander felt a surge of respect for her. He pressed the intercom. Harris, get in here. The assistant entered quickly, his face pale from the chaos outside. Yes, sir. Bring the legal team. Now. And prepare every contract I signed with Hayes. I want them reviewed line by line. Also send 2 men to secure these files. Nobody touches them without my permission. Harris hesitated. Sir, do you really believe this child? Alexander's voice turned cold. I don't believe her. I know she's right. The assistant lowered his head and hurried out. Emily watched silently. Alexander turned back to her. Your father will no longer suffer in silence. I will meet him myself. Tonight, I want to hear his story directly from him. Until then, you'll stay safe here. Emily blinked, surprised. You mean you'll come to our house? Yes, Alexander replied firmly. If Hayes thinks he can bury the truth, he's wrong. I want to see where this all began. Hours passed, and the office turned into a battlefield of lawyers and auditors. Files were opened, contracts checked, and every eye focused on uncovering the hidden fraud. And while the storm raged, Emily sat quietly in the corner, watching the empire shift around her. By evening, Alexander was ready. His black car pulled up to a narrow street, far from the tall towers of the city. Emily led him to a small worn-down house where her father sat with tired eyes and calloused hands. Daniel Parker looked up, startled to see the CEO himself at his door. Mr. Parker, Alexander said, his voice steady, your daughter has told me everything. Tonight, I want to hear it from you. Daniel froze, his eyes darting to Emily, then back at Alexander. You came here. Why? Because the truth you carried alone is now my battle too. Alexander answered. Daniel sank into his chair, disbelief flooding his face. For years, no one had listened. And now, the most powerful man in the city was standing in his living room. Slowly, Daniel began to speak. He told Alexander about the day he discovered Hayes's fraud, the threats, the humiliation, the way doors slammed in his face. His voice broke at times, but Emily's steady gaze gave him courage. Alexander listened, his fists clenched. Every detail was another strike against Hayes. Every word confirmed the betrayal. When Daniel finished, silence filled the room. Alexander rose slowly. "Mr. Parker, from tonight, you are no longer alone. I will fight this. I will expose him. And I will make sure your name is cleared." Daniel's eyes welled with tears. "Why would you risk so much for us?" Alexander looked at Emily. "Because your daughter reminded me that truth is priceless. And I will not let anyone bury it." Emily smiled faintly, relief washing over her face. For the first time, hope had stepped into their broken home. But as Alexander left the house, his phone buzzed with a message. He opened it, and his eyes darkened. It was a warning, short and sharp: "Stay out of this. Or you'll regret it." Alexander clenched his jaw. Hayes already knew. The war had begun. Alexander stood outside the Parker home, the night air heavy and still. The message on his phone glowed like fire in his hand: "Stay out of this. Or you'll regret it." For a man who built an empire through strategy and fearlessness, threats were not new. But this was different. Hayes had already crossed a line, and now Alexander's anger was sharpened by betrayal. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his jaw hardening. This was no longer just business. It was war. Inside the house, Emily watched him through the window. She had seen his expression change when he read the message. Something told her this fight was going to be bigger than anyone expected. She turned to her father, who sat with his head in his hands. "Papa," she whispered, "believes us. Maybe things will finally change." Daniel looked at her tiredly. Years of disappointment etched on his face. "Emily, men like Hayes don't lose easily. He has money, power, and people in his pocket. Going against him, it won't be simple." Emily straightened her back, determination glowing in her eyes. "But we have the truth. And now we have him," she said, pointing toward the door where Alexander had just stepped out. Back in the car, Alexander sat in silence, staring at the city lights flickering across the windshield. Harris, his assistant, sat nervously beside him. "Sir," Harris began carefully, "this could destroy your reputation. If Hayes pushes back, he can drag your name into the mud. Are you sure you want to risk this?" Alexander turned his head slowly, his eyes sharp as steel. "Harris, I built this company on strength and trust. If I let a fraud like Hayes steal from me and ruin honest men like Daniel, then everything I stand for means nothing. I will not back down." The car moved through the streets until they reached Alexander's penthouse. The night skyline stretched endlessly. But his mind was fixed on the battle ahead. He walked to his study, pulled out every contract he had signed with Hayes, and spread them across the massive oak desk. Page after page, he searched, marking flaws, hidden traps, and signs of forgery. By midnight, his legal team filled the room. Files were stacked, laptops open. Voices low but urgent. "Sir," one of the lawyers said, "if this goes to court, it will be brutal. Hayes has connections everywhere." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but unyielding. "Then we fight smarter. If he thinks power will protect him, he has forgotten that truth has its own power." Meanwhile, Hayes sat in his luxurious office across town, sipping wine and smiling as if nothing could touch him. His phone buzzed. A message appeared from his informant inside Alexander's company. "The CEO knows." The girl exposed the papers. Hayes's smile faded. He slammed the glass on the table, wine spilling onto the carpet. "So the little rat thinks she can ruin me," he muttered. And Alexander, he should have stayed blind. His eyes darkened with rage. If they want a fight, they'll get one. The next morning, Alexander returned to his company earlier than usual. The staff looked tense, rumors had already spread. Some whispered that the deal with Hayes had collapsed, others that the CEO had been betrayed. But when Alexander stepped into the building, his presence silenced every voice. He walked straight to the boardroom, where the directors sat waiting nervously. "I know what you've heard," Alexander began, his voice steady. "Yes, Hayes attempted to defraud us. Yes, we came close to losing hundreds of millions. But thanks to someone who had the courage to speak, we stopped it. This company will not fall to lies. Not now, not ever. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. One of them spoke up. Sir, if Hayes retaliates, it could affect our investors. We must consider carefully. Alexander's eyes blazed. Carefully is what nearly destroyed us. From this moment on, we act boldly. I will not bow to fraud, no matter how powerful he thinks he is. As the meeting ended, Emily appeared quietly at the doorway, clutching her school bag. She had come to see if Alexander needed her again. The staff stared in surprise as she walked in, but Alexander smiled faintly. Emily. Come here. She stepped into the boardroom, her small shoes echoing on the floor. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. This is the girl who saved this company. Remember her face. She had more courage than many grown men I know. The room fell silent, respect filling the air. Emily lowered her eyes. But inside her heart swelled with pride. Later that afternoon, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Alexander's office. He opened it to find another warning note. If you push this further, you and your company will pay the price. Alexander crumpled the paper in his hand. Harris looked at him nervously. Sir, what now? Alexander's voice was calm but sharp. Now we push harder. Hayes thinks fear will silence me. But fear belongs to cowards. I am not one of them. That night, Alexander made a call to one of the most trusted investigators in the city. I need everything on Hayes, he said. Every deal, every signature, every man he's paid off. No stone unturned. The investigator's voice was steady. It will take time. But I'll get it done. Alexander hung up, his eyes fixed on the city lights. He knew Hayes would strike back. He knew the fight would be dangerous. But as he thought of Emily and her father, his resolve only grew stronger. This was no longer just about business. It was about justice. And Alexander Cole never lost a battle once he committed to it. Somewhere across the city, Hayes sat plotting his next move. Unaware that the man he tried to deceive had already declared war on him. And in the middle of it all was a little girl, who refused to stay silent. The storm was only beginning. The office had turned into a battlefield of whispers. Nobody dared to speak loudly, but everyone was talking. Alexander could hear the murmur of voices outside his glass walls. He ignored them and kept his eyes fixed on the file the girl had left. His fingers tapped the table. Steady, sharp, controlled. The words in the forged documents were now printed in his mind. Deals worth millions, signed under his name. But with terms he had never approved. If this was true, then someone had managed to sneak past his entire empire of lawyers, auditors, and managers. That was not just a mistake. That was war. He leaned back in his chair, thinking, who has the courage, who has the access? Suddenly, the door opened. It was Daniel. His most trusted assistant, the man who had been with him for 7 years. Sir, Daniel said, his voice calm. Do you want me to look into it? Alexander studied him for a long second. Daniel looked steady, but Alexander's instincts were sharp. He had built his empire by reading people, and right now, he was not sure if Daniel was hiding something. No. Alexander said finally. I'll handle this myself. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. As you wish. When he left, Alexander stood up and walked to the wide glass window. The city skyline stretched in front of him, tall towers reflecting the sun, cars moving like tiny veins of life below. This city was his kingdom. And now, someone was challenging it. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, stop digging. Or everything you built will burn. Alexander's jaw tightened. He read the message twice, then threw the phone on his desk. Someone was already one step ahead. Someone was watching him closely enough to know he had started looking. He picked up the file again, scanning for details. The signatures, the dates, the company seals, perfect replicas. Almost impossible to detect unless someone pointed them out. The girl had done it. But how did she know? Who was she really? For the first time in years, Alexander felt a chill of uncertainty. He was the kind of man who hated loose ends. And right now, the girl was the biggest loose end of his life. Later that evening, Alexander drove his black car himself, no driver, no assistant. He went straight to the old library downtown. A place he hadn't visited in years. But he remembered the girl's face, her calm voice, her sharp words. And he remembered the badge she dropped when she left. A small ID card from this library. He parked outside, walked in, and the smell of old books hit him instantly. The place was quiet, a few readers scattered across wooden tables. And there, in the corner, he saw her. She was sitting with a stack of documents, her eyes running across the pages like she was searching for something hidden in plain sight. Alexander walked straight to her table. She looked up, startled, but didn't move. Her eyes met his without fear. "You," Alexander said, his voice low but firm. "Yes," she answered calmly. "You think you can walk into my office, call my documents fake, and then just disappear?" "I didn't disappear," she said. "You came to me." For a moment, Alexander almost smiled, bold, too bold for her age. "Who are you?" he asked. She closed the file in front of her and said, "My name is Sarah. And I know more about your company than you think." "Sarah what?" "Sarah Collins." The name meant nothing to Alexander. He had never heard of her before. "Why should I believe you?" he asked. She leaned closer, her voice steady. "Because the people forging your documents are inside your own circle. And if you don't listen to me, you'll lose everything." Alexander's heart beat harder, but his face stayed calm. "Inside my circle. That's a heavy claim. Do you have proof?" Sarah slid a piece of paper toward him. Alexander picked it up. It was an internal memo, dated 3 weeks ago. Signed by one of his top executives. A memo approving a deal Alexander had never seen. He clenched his fist around the paper. "How did you get this?" Sarah looked him in the eye. "The same way I got into your office." For the first time in years, Alexander felt something he rarely experienced: respect. This girl was not ordinary. She was smart, dangerous, and fearless. But the question remained. Was she a friend, or an enemy playing a bigger game? Alexander drove back late that night. The city lights blurred past his windshield, but his mind was clear. He now knew 3 things: 1, the documents were forged. 2, the traitor was inside his circle. And 3, Sarah Collins was not leaving his sight until he figured out which side she was truly on. When he reached his penthouse, the message light on his phone blinked again. Another text: "Last warning, walk away." Alexander stared at the words. Then he typed back only 2. "Come try." Alexander Reed's mind was still haunted by the moment when the little girl had placed those files on his desk and whispered, "These papers are forged." At first, he wanted to believe it was just a mistake, or maybe some child being manipulated by outsiders. But as the days passed, something inside him refused to let it go. That night, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing screens of the building's security system. He replayed every camera angle from the day the girl appeared. The lobby footage was clear. She walked in, placed the file before him, spoke her words, and left. But when he switched to the other floors, a chilling realization hit him. There was no trace of her. Not in the elevators. Not on the stairwells. Not in the hallways. It was as if she had entered only the part of the building where he could see her. And then vanished without a shadow. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "What kind of game is this?" he muttered under his breath. He immediately summoned his most trusted IT director. The man arrived within minutes, sweating nervously as Alexander pointed to the footage. "Check it again," Alexander ordered coldly. "Is this a hack, a glitch, or—" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Is someone trying to make me doubt my own reality?" The IT director swallowed hard, rewound the footage, and shook his head. "Sir, everything is clean. No hacks, no tampering. The system is intact." Alexander's eyes darkened. If the system was flawless, then who, or what, was that girl? The silence that lingered after the girl left the office was heavy, almost suffocating. Alexander Reed stood near the tall glass window of his office, his reflection merging with the city skyline beyond. For years, he had been the man others feared. The one who exposed weakness in competitors, and crushed them without hesitation. But now, for the first time, he felt like the ground beneath him was no longer steady. Her words kept echoing in his head. "These papers are forged." Simple, direct, undeniable. He wanted to believe it was just a bold child's trick. Yet his instincts whispered otherwise. Alexander was not a man who ignored instincts. They had built his empire. They had kept him alive in a world where one mistake could destroy everything. He turned back to his desk, staring at the file she had left behind. He hadn't opened it yet. It was as if something in him was afraid of what he would find. For a man like Alexander Reed, fear was rare. But this wasn't fear of loss. It was the fear of betrayal. He pressed the intercom. "Olivia, come in." His secretary walked in, sharp and professional. But even she noticed the unusual look on his face. "Yes, sir." Alexander handed her the file. "I want this verified. Every detail, every signature, every stamp. Don't use our usual people. Find someone completely outside our circle. Discreet. I want results in 24 hours. Olivia nodded, though her eyes flickered with surprise. "Of course, Mr. Reed." As she left, Alexander sat down and finally allowed himself to breathe. He knew that if the girl was right, this wasn't just about forged papers. It meant there was someone inside his empire working against him. And if they were bold enough to manipulate property contracts worth $100 million, then the enemy was not small. This was a war he hadn't seen coming. That night, as the city pulsed with lights below, Alexander couldn't bring himself to leave the office. He replayed every major deal from the past year, scanning through names, signatures, and faces in his memory. Who among them had the power, the access, and the motive? Then a thought struck him. A dangerous one. What if this wasn't just a random betrayal? What if the girl had been sent deliberately? Someone might have chosen her to strike at him in the most unexpected way. A child's voice could cut through walls of pride and ego in a way no rival ever could. The following morning, Olivia returned. Her face was pale, her usual calm gone. She placed the file on his desk with trembling hands. "It's true," she whispered. "The documents are fake. Every signature has been forged. Whoever did this knew exactly how to hide it. If that girl hadn't spoken, we never would have noticed." For a long moment, Alexander didn't move. The truth had landed like a hammer blow. He leaned back, steepling his fingers, his sharp eyes turning colder. "Find the girl," he said finally. "I need to know who she is and why she came to me." Because now Alexander Reed understood one thing clearly. This was not the end of the story. This was only the beginning of a war that would test everything he had built. The night settled heavy over the city. But Alexander Reed's office was still alive with the glow of lights. His mind was burning with questions he couldn't shake off. The girl's warning about forged documents wasn't something he could ignore anymore. He had spent days replaying her words, and every time he did, the suspicion in his chest grew stronger. Something was wrong inside Reed Enterprises, something much bigger than a little girl daring to stop him at his own office door. He had spent his life building an empire, stone by stone, deal by deal. Every contract, every signature was supposed to be a mark of power. But now, there was a whisper of betrayal lurking beneath the polished glass walls of his company. Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the city lights shimmered through the tall windows. His assistant had left hours ago, but he had ordered his head of legal affairs, Jonathan Hale, to stay. Jonathan was loyal, or at least he appeared to be. Tonight, Alexander wanted answers. "Jonathan," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Tell me again, who approved the riverfront deal?" Jonathan adjusted his glasses nervously. "Sir, the paperwork was reviewed by the finance division, signed by our legal team, and cleared by me before reaching your desk. You approved it afterward." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "And yet, the girl said the documents were forged. Do you know what that means, Jonathan? It means someone inside this building has the audacity to tamper with billion-dollar contracts." Jonathan hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, how much weight are we giving to the words of a child? She could have been mistaken, or manipulated." Alexander slammed his hand on the desk, making Jonathan jump. "Do not underestimate anyone. Truth can come from the smallest voice. I've learned that power often tries to bury truth under paperwork and money. That girl saw something, and I need to know what." Silence fell. The hum of the city below was the only sound. Finally, Jonathan spoke again. "If you truly believe there's forgery, then it must be someone very close, someone with access to your personal files before you sign." Alexander leaned forward. "Exactly. Which means this is not an outside attack, it's an inside betrayal." The weight of those words lingered in the air. Inside betrayal. The very phrase made Alexander's blood boil. He had enemies everywhere in the corporate world, but betrayal from within. That was poison, slow and fatal. Later that night, Alexander walked out of his office into the empty hallway. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, as he looked around the silent building. He had built this empire to be untouchable. Yet tonight, the walls seemed to close in, whispering secrets he couldn't hear. When he reached the lobby, he saw the reflection of himself in the glass doors. Powerful, successful, untouchable. But for the first time in years, he also saw something else he'd doubt. The next morning, Alexander was not in his office. Instead, he drove across the city, away from the skyscrapers, away from the noise of business. He stopped outside a small library near the old quarter of town. The girl had mentioned she lived nearby. And his instincts told him she was the key to uncovering the truth. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and dust. Children sat on small chairs reading stories. And there she was, the girl. She wasn't holding a teddy bear this time. Instead, she was bent over a pile of books, reading quietly. Her face lit up in the dim light of the room, innocent yet determined. Alexander walked closer. She looked up and froze when she saw him. "You," she whispered, clutching the edge of her book. "Yes, me," Alexander replied. "We need to talk." Her eyes widened. "I already told you, the documents were fake. Why are you here?" Alexander studied her carefully. "Because you may know something no one else is brave enough to say." "Tell me. How did you know about the forgery?" The girl hesitated. She looked around as if afraid someone might hear. Then she lowered her voice. "My brother works for your company. Hey, he found out the truth but was too scared to say anything. He showed me the papers before they reached you. I memorized the seal, the signature. It wasn't real. I knew I had to warn you." Alexander's heart raced. "Your brother? What's his name?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you. If they find out, they'll hurt him." Alexander crouched down so that he was at her eye level. His voice softened. "Listen to me. Whoever is doing this, they are trying to destroy everything I've built. But they won't stop with me. They'll ruin anyone who stands in their way. If your brother is caught in this, he's already in danger. The only way to protect him is to tell me." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. "His name is Daniel. He works in the finance department. Please don't let them hurt him." Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder. "I promise you. I'll protect him. But I need you to trust me." By the time Alexander returned to his office, his mind was sharper than ever. The pieces of the puzzle were finally connecting. Daniel in finance, forged documents. A child bold enough to speak when adults stayed silent. He called Jonathan Hale into his office again. "Jonathan," he said coldly, "I want a full investigation into the finance department. Quietly. Don't alert anyone. And find me everything about a man named Daniel." Jonathan looked unsettled. "Of course, sir. But may I ask why?" Alexander's gaze was like steel. "Because I believe someone is weaving a web of lies right under my nose. And I intend to tear it apart." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Jonathan nodded and walked out, leaving Alexander alone once more. He stood by the window, staring at the city below. The empire he had built was being tested. Not from outside competitors, but from the shadows within. And he knew this was only the beginning. The girl's words echoed in his mind again. Those papers were forged. Now Alexander Reed was determined to uncover every truth, no matter how dangerous it would be. Alexander Reed sat in his office, staring at the city skyline as the morning sunlight bounced off the glass towers. His mind was restless. The words of the little girl echoed in his head again and again. These papers are forged. He had built his empire on strength, authority, and fear, but never had a child's voice shaken him the way hers did. For the past few days, he had asked his team to recheck every deal signed recently. He wanted proof, hard evidence, something that could silence the doubt. But each report returned the same flawless documents, spotless signatures, airtight contracts. Yet his gut refused to rest. He knew the corporate world too well. When something looked too perfect, it usually wasn't. That morning, his assistant entered quietly, placing another folder on his desk. "Sir, this is from the legal department. They insist everything is authentic." Alexander didn't respond immediately. He flipped the folder open, scanning the pages with sharp eyes. Each signature, each stamp, each clause perfect. Almost too perfect. he leaned back in his chair, tapping the desk with his finger. If everything is so perfect, he murmured, why does it feel like a trap? His assistant hesitated. Do you want me to close the investigation, sir? Alexander's eyes narrowed. No. Double the effort. This isn't over. Later that day, as he stepped out of the building, a strange silence lingered in the lobby. Normally, people whispered or stiffened when he walked past. But today their eyes shifted nervously, as if they knew something he didn't. And then he saw her again. The same little girl. She stood near the entrance, holding the same worn-out file. Her clothes were simple, her hair a little messy, but her eyes carried a fire that most adults lacked. She walked up to him with no hesitation. Sir, she said firmly, I told you before. These papers are forged. If you don't believe me, the truth will destroy you. For a brief second, Alexander felt his chest tighten. He wasn't a man easily shaken, but the certainty in her tone unsettled him. He crouched slightly to meet her eye level and asked, and how do you know this? The girl clutched the file tighter. Because my father trusted those papers. He believed your company would save him. Instead he lost everything. I saw him break. I saw the lies hidden in the fine print. Her words struck like thunder. A memory surfaced. One of his own deals from years ago, when competitors were crushed mercilessly, families broken, dreams shattered. He had told himself it was business, nothing personal. But now, hearing it from a child, it sounded like betrayal. Before he could respond, security rushed forward, trying to move the girl away. Sir, should we? Stop. Alexander ordered, raising his hand. His tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. No one touches her. The girl looked at him for a long moment, then handed him the file. If you really want to know the truth, read these pages. And this time, don't just see the ink. See the lies written between the lines. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd outside. Alexander stood frozen, the file heavy in his hands. He opened it slowly, and as his eyes scanned the first page, something inside him shifted. The words were ordinary. The contracts professional. But the numbers, the dates, the signatures, subtle differences appeared. Differences so small that only someone desperate, someone who had nothing left to lose, would notice them. His pulse quickened. For the first time in years, he felt fear. Not of losing money, not of losing power, but of uncovering a truth that could collapse his empire. He closed the file, gripping it tightly. The city outside still looked powerful, glowing with wealth and ambition, but to Alexander, the glass towers suddenly felt fragile. And deep inside, he knew the storm had only begun. The silence in Alexander Reed's office was heavy. The words of the girl had shaken him, but now another shadow loomed. His own past. For the first time in years, memories he had buried deep began to surface, forcing him to face the truth he had long ignored. The girl's voice echoed in his mind. These documents are forged. It wasn't just about one deal. Something told him this was bigger, something connected to the very foundations of Reed Enterprises. Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, his fists clenched. He knew the girl hadn't lied. He had seen the fear in her eyes, but also the courage. That night, he returned to his penthouse, but sleep refused to come. Every deal, every partnership, every empire he had built now seemed fragile. He poured himself a glass of water, and stood by the window overlooking the city lights. He had risen from nothing to become one of the most powerful men in America. Yet in this moment, he felt small. The next morning, Alexander ordered a private investigation. Not just into the papers the girl had shown him, but into his own company. Search everything, he told his head of security. I want no stone left unturned. His tone was sharp, but inside, his chest felt heavy. He wasn't sure he was ready for the answers. Days passed, and the investigation uncovered something chilling. Hidden within old archives and confidential records were files tied to Alexander's earliest days in business. Contracts forged, properties acquired through deceit, and signatures falsified. He had not done it himself, but those who once stood by his side had dirtied his empire before it even began. As the evidence piled up on his desk, Alexander's jaw tightened. He realized the girl's accusation wasn't just a warning. It was a mirror showing him that corruption had always followed him, even when he thought he was building something pure. That evening, he received another anonymous envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a much younger Alexander shaking hands with a man who had disappeared years ago under suspicious circumstances. Written on the back were the words, "The past always finds its way back." For the first time in decades, Alexander Reed felt fear, not of losing money or power, but of losing himself. His empire wasn't as unshakable as he believed. And now, he wondered if the girl was just the beginning of something much larger. Something that could destroy not just him, but everything he had built. The shadows of the past had returned. And Alexander knew he had no choice but to face them. Alexander Reed sat alone in his office, the city lights outside casting long shadows across the polished floor. The past few days had been relentless. Every lead, every investigation, every document pointed to something he had never expected. The threat was not outside. It was within. The girl's warning echoed again in his mind. These papers are forged. At first, he thought it was a single act of courage, a child standing up for truth. But now he realized it was more than that. She had uncovered a thread, and pulling on it revealed a network of deception running deep through Reed Enterprises. His phone buzzed. A secure message flashed on the screen, "Meet me at 10 p.m., Warehouse District, alone, come if you want the truth." No name, no explanation. Just a time, place, and a warning. Alexander didn't hesitate. He had learned long ago that threats came from shadows, and if someone wanted to reveal the truth, they would choose darkness for a reason. That night he drove his black sedan through the city streets, carefully watching for anything unusual. The warehouse district was deserted, fog curling around the corners of abandoned buildings. He parked, turned off the engine, and stepped into the cold night air. A figure emerged from the shadows. The girl, Emily. Her small frame looked fragile, but her eyes burned with determination. "Sir," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Alexander studied her carefully. "You should not have come here alone. It's dangerous." She shook her head. "I had to. If I don't tell you now, more people will get hurt. And it's bigger than just forged documents. Someone inside your company wants to take everything, including your life if necessary." Alexander's pulse quickened. "Ooh, tell me everything." Emily handed him a small envelope. "All the proof is inside. Names, dates, even recordings. They are planning a complete takeover. They've infiltrated finance, legal, even your closest advisors. If you don't act fast, they will own everything you've built." Alexander took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. This was more than a warning. This was a blueprint of betrayal. The girl's courage had led him to the heart of a conspiracy he never imagined. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Emily's voice was steady. "Because someone has to stop them. My father tried, and he failed. I can't let anyone else suffer like we did." Alexander nodded. He knew what needed to be done. "Tomorrow, we begin a silent strike. I will root out every traitor, expose every lie. But you must promise me, you stay safe." She nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I will, sir. But only if you promise me one thing: don't underestimate them. They are clever. And they are ruthless." He watched her disappear into the shadows, then returned to his car, his mind racing. The night felt colder, the city darker. But Alexander Reed had never backed down from a challenge. Not now. Inside, the envelope on his passenger seat held the future of his empire. Names of trusted executives, secret communications, forged contracts, all the evidence he needed to fight back. Tomorrow the storm would begin, and Alexander Reed was ready. The sun rose over the city, but Alexander Reed didn't feel its warmth. His mind was consumed by the revelations Emily had delivered the previous night. The envelope on his desk contained everything he needed: names, forged contracts, and secret communications. The betrayal ran deep, infiltrating every corner of his empire. But Alexander was no ordinary man. He was ready to fight. He called an emergency meeting with his closest allies, the only people he could still trust implicitly. Thomas, his legal head, and Clara, his operations director, entered the room, sensing the tension. Alexander didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We have a threat inside the company," he said, voice low but commanding. "Someone has forged documents, manipulated deals, and is planning a hostile takeover. We know their names, their methods, and their next move. Today we strike." Thomas swallowed hard. "Sir, this is dangerous. Exposing them now could destabilize the company, even ruin us if they act first. Alexander's eyes were cold and unwavering. I've built this empire through risk. Today we take calculated risk. We act quietly, systematically, and without hesitation. They won't see it coming. He handed them a list from Emily's envelope. Each name was marked, each connection mapped out. The conspirators were clever, but not clever enough to anticipate Alexander Reed's precision. Throughout the day, Alexander moved like a shadow through his own company. Departments that had once operated freely now felt the quiet pressure of his presence. Every call he made, every file he examined, was part of a strategy to expose the traitors without alerting them. By evening, the first trap was set. He summoned Daniel, the finance executive Emily had mentioned, and brought him into a private office. Daniel, Alexander began calmly. We know what's been happening. You were involved in forging documents. Tell me the truth, and you may salvage what remains of your career. Lee, and you will face consequences you cannot imagine. Daniel's face went pale. He stammered, trying to form words. But Alexander's gaze was like steel, unyielding. I didn't know it would go this far, Daniel confessed finally. I only followed orders. Alexander nodded slowly. Good. Now, you will cooperate fully. Provide every email, every signature, every detail. And you will help us stop the others before they destroy everything. Daniel nodded, terrified but relieved. Alexander knew that fear was a tool as powerful as money or power. It forced honesty, it revealed secrets, and tonight, it was his weapon. As night fell over the city, Alexander returned to his office alone. He opened Emily's envelope again, reviewing the remaining names and connections. The storm was just beginning, and he was ready to lead the first strike. Somewhere out there, the conspirators were planning their moves, believing they were untouchable. But Alexander Reed had one advantage they hadn't counted on. A child's courage, a father's loyalty, and the unbreakable resolve of a man who would not let his empire fall. The first strike had begun. And the night was only the beginning of the battle. The city lights flickered against the glass towers as Alexander Reed returned to his office. The first strike had been a success, but the war was far from over. Each name Emily had given him represented a thread in a web of deceit, and he knew he had to pull each one carefully to expose the full network. Alexander called Clara and Thomas into his office again. We have evidence against Daniel now, he began, placing the files on the table. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. The people orchestrating this are clever, and they are hiding in plain sight. It's time to unmask them. Clara leaned forward, concern in her eyes. Sir, some of these people are your trusted executives. Are you sure we should move so aggressively? One wrong move. Alexander's voice cut through the tension. One wrong move could destroy everything. But inaction is far worse. We proceed quietly, but with absolute precision. We don't confront them blindly, we gather proof, we record their moves. And we let them expose themselves. He turned his attention to the list in Emily's envelope, cross-referencing it with internal communications. Subtle discrepancies appeared, unauthorized meetings, transfers and emails hidden from normal oversight. Each clue pointed to the next betrayer. Hours passed as Alexander's team worked methodically. Surveillance footage, financial records, and email traces were analyzed and pieced together like a complex puzzle. Every name, every action, every hidden motive came into focus. Finally, a breakthrough occurred. One executive, Richard Lang, head of operations, had been manipulating contracts and siphoning funds while hiding his tracks behind layers of forged signatures. The evidence was irrefutable. Alexander summoned Richard to his office under the guise of a routine meeting. The moment the door closed, Richard's confident facade faltered. He saw the files, the recordings, and the unmistakable seriousness in Alexander's eyes. Sir, I can explain. Richard began, but Alexander raised a hand. No explanations. Alexander said coldly. You have betrayed this company, its employees, and everyone who trusted you. You will cooperate fully, or the consequences will be severe. Richard swallowed hard, realizing he had been caught. I will give you everything, he stammered. Alexander nodded. Good, and one more thing, stay where you are. Do not contact anyone. We are not finished. Others are still out there, and we need them exposed too. As Richard left, Alexander turned to Clara and Thomas. This is just the beginning. The web is extensive, and every move we make must be precise. One misstep, and they'll cover their tracks again. But we're closer than ever to cleaning this house. Outside, the city thrummed with life, oblivious to the silent battle being fought within Reed Enterprises. Alexander knew the conspirators believed themselves untouchable. But soon, every secret, every lie, and every betrayal would be laid bare. He picked up the file from Emily, feeling the weight of the truth she had delivered. A child had dared to speak the words no adult would say. And that courage was reshaping his empire. Tonight, he thought, the betrayers had learned one undeniable truth: Alexander Reed did not forgive. And Alexander Reed did not forget. Alexander Reed sat in the dimly lit office. The city lights casting long reflections across the glass walls. Each step he had taken to expose the first layer of betrayal had revealed only a fraction of the conspiracy. The deeper he looked, the more complex it became. Every ally he thought he could trust now carried a shadow of doubt. Emily's envelope had proven invaluable. The files inside mapped out connections he could never have imagined. Interlocking schemes, hidden accounts, and falsified records stretching across multiple departments. The threads of deception were tangled, and the stakes were higher than ever. Alexander leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment. This isn't just about forged documents anymore, he thought. This is about control. Someone is trying to seize my empire. And they have been planning this for years. He called his top security team into the office. Listen carefully. He began, his voice calm but forceful. We have unearthed a hidden agenda. This is not a single act of greed or betrayal. It is a carefully orchestrated takeover. Every move they make has been calculated. We cannot afford mistakes. Clara, standing beside him, spoke up. Sir, the people involved, some are at the very top. Executives, board members, even people you considered loyal. How do we expose them without alerting the others? Alexander's eyes glinted with determination. We'll expose them quietly. We use their own schemes against them. We let them act while we gather the final proof. They will reveal themselves, thinking they are safe. By then, it will be too late. He turned to the list of names cross-referencing with recent deals. Patterns emerged. Hidden transfers, suspicious approvals, and secret communications. One by one, the conspirators were connected like pieces on a chessboard. At midnight, Alexander reviewed surveillance footage, focusing on key employees he suspected were part of the hidden agenda. He spotted encrypted emails being passed through personal devices, clandestine meetings in remote locations, and financial transactions disguised as routine company activity. It was meticulous work, but Alexander was relentless. He knew that patience was as much a weapon as power. Every detail, every anomaly, every whisper of deception was a step closer to unmasking the true masterminds. Then a breakthrough arrived. A late-night call from Daniel, the finance insider Emily had mentioned. Sir, I found something. Daniel's voice trembled. There's a hidden account being funded from multiple departments. It's connected to some of your closest advisors. They've been siphoning money and preparing for the takeover for months. Alexander's jaw tightened. Good work, Daniel. Keep this quiet. I want a complete trail. Every transaction, every signature, every communication. Nothing can escape us now. He ended the call, placing the receiver down slowly. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but alongside it came a renewed sense of purpose. Emily had shown courage beyond her years. And now he had the opportunity to correct the wrongs, protect the innocent, and take control of his empire before it was too late. Alexander stood by the window, staring at the sprawling city below. Somewhere in its shadows, the conspirators were moving, believing themselves untouchable. But they had underestimated one thing. The resolve of a man who had built an empire from nothing, guided by both instinct and courage. The hidden agenda was being revealed, and Alexander Reed was ready to strike, to dismantle every lie, and to reclaim what was rightfully his. The storm was coming, and this time there would be no mercy for those who had betrayed him. 2. The night settled over the city. But Alexander Reed's mind refused to rest. Every lead, every detail from Emily's files, and every betrayal Daniel had uncovered pointed toward a single truth. The conspirators were bold, clever, and dangerous. But Alexander was more determined than ever. Tonight, he would turn the tables. He called his closest team into his private conference room. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of tension that makes silence deafening. "We have enough evidence now," Alexander began, his voice calm but commanding. "It's time to act. The trap is set. We will let them make their move. Thinking they are in control. By morning, they will reveal themselves." Clara, his operations director, leaned forward. "Sir, what if they sense the trap? Some of these people are extremely cunning. They could disappear or retaliate before we get the chance." Alexander's eyes were sharp. "Let them move. That's exactly what I want. Every email they send, every call they make, every secret meeting, they will leave traces. We will track them. And when they think they are untouchable, we will strike." He opened the folder Emily had given him, reviewing the list of names and locations. Every step had been carefully calculated. The conspirators had spread themselves across departments, thinking secrecy would protect them. But Alexander had the advantage. Foresight, patience, and information no one else possessed. At midnight, Alexander's team monitored every possible channel. Phones, computers, even the parking garage cameras. Nothing escaped their watchful eyes. Outside, the city was quiet, but inside Reed Enterprises, a silent war was underway. Hours passed. And then the first movement appeared. One of the senior executives, unaware he was being observed, sent an encrypted email to an unknown accomplice. Alexander leaned forward, reading every word, noting every connection. Clara whispered, "They're communicating. They're falling right into our hands." Alexander nodded. "Good. Let them believe they are free. The more confident they are, the easier it will be to capture them." Minutes later, another alert appeared. A meeting had been scheduled in a remote location, a warehouse outside the city. The participants included 2 executives and a legal advisor, key players in the conspiracy. Alexander studied the details carefully. This was it. The moment the trap would snap. He turned to Daniel. "You're coming with me. You know them, you know their habits, and you know what to look for. This is your chance to make amends and help save the company." Daniel nodded, fear and determination in his eyes. "I won't let you down, sir." As they prepared to leave, Alexander took one last glance at the city. Lights glittered like stars, oblivious to the storm brewing within its heart. He knew that by morning, the conspirators would have exposed themselves completely, and there would be no turning back. Tonight, the trap was set. And when the dawn came, Alexander Reed would reclaim control, expose every traitor, and ensure that Reed Enterprises would never again be vulnerable to deceit. The warehouse sat in silence. Shrouded by the night, far from the glittering city skyline. Alexander Reed arrived with Daniel and his trusted team, moving carefully through the shadows. Every step had been planned, every angle surveyed. The conspirators believed they were untouchable. But they had underestimated one thing: Alexander's determination. Inside, the traitors were gathered around a table, speaking in hushed voices about the final stages of their takeover. They were confident, arrogant, and blinded by greed. Every move they made was being observed by Alexander's team through discreet cameras and live communication feeds. Alexander stepped into the room, his presence silent but commanding. The conspirators froze as he turned the lights on, revealing himself. "Good evening," he said. Voice calm yet carrying authority that froze the room in place. "I believe we have much to discuss." Shock rippled across their faces. Some tried to speak, to deny, to bluff. But Alexander held up a folder. Inside were the emails, transactions, recordings, and documents that proved every betrayal. Every move you made, every lie you told, every document you forged, you have left a trail. And now, it ends. Emily's warning echoed in his mind, those papers were forged. He realized then that her courage had saved his empire, his employees, and the integrity of everything he had built. The conspirators tried to protest. But Alexander's team stepped forward, ready to detain them. "It's over," Alexander said. "You thought you could manipulate the system from the shadows. But truth always finds a way to the light. And tonight, your deception has been exposed." Daniel stepped forward as well, holding additional evidence they had collected secretly. "Al, the proof is here," he said, looking directly at the leaders of the conspiracy. "There is no escape." One by one, the conspirators realized the game was over. Fear replaced arrogance. Some bowed their heads in shame, others tried to bargain, but Alexander did not waver. Justice would be served. By midnight, the warehouse had been secured. The conspirators were in custody. Evidence was documented, and Reed Enterprises was safe once more. Alexander finally allowed himself to breathe. A sense of relief mingled with exhaustion washing over him. He stepped outside into the cool night air, looking at the city lights. The empire he had built through years of struggle, vision, and sheer willpower had survived a threat from within. And he knew it was not just his leadership that had saved it. It was the courage of a little girl, who dared to speak the truth when no one else would. Alexander smiled faintly. He realized that real strength did not come from fear or power alone. It came from listening to truth. From protecting those who could not defend themselves. And from acting decisively when the stakes were highest. Emily's words returned to him once more. If you don't act fast, they will own everything you've built. He had acted, and he had won. As dawn broke over the city, Alexander Reed returned to his office. Looking out over the skyline he had defended. The empire was intact, the traitors exposed, and a lesson had been learned: no deception could ever overpower courage, truth, and determination. He leaned back in his chair, thinking of the little girl who had changed everything. Sometimes, he whispered, the smallest voices carry the greatest power. And with that, he knew that Reed Enterprises would rise stronger than ever. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you learned from this video. Or if you've experienced something similar, we'd love to hear your story. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us.